Hello everyone. Today I'm going to walk you through the entire story, from the moment a random idea popped into my head back in February about buying a sawmill, all the way to actually getting it, assembling it, and of course, how much the whole adventure cost me. So, in February, I got a bit bored, which is always dangerous, and suddenly thought, why not get my own sawmill for the homestead? My very own. Why not, right? I went on Alibaba.com, where there's an endless sea of all kinds of machines and gadgets. That's where I came across a company called Rima. They look pretty reliable. First, they're verified on Alibaba. Second, they've been on the platform for 12 years already. And third, the negative reviews weren't too scary, which, is already a good sign these days. I picked a model, spent a long time deciding between a gasoline or an electric version. In the end, the electric one seemed simpler, and honestly, more reliable. So I sent a request about the electric sawmill with a motor. Why electric? It's quieter. It requires less maintenance. If anything happens, you can just replace the motor. No fuel, no fumes, no headaches. So I send them the request and the conversation begins. The replies were fast. They gave me prices, and generally everything looked reasonable. Of course, I immediately started adding extras. First, I added an additional 2 meters of rail so I could cut 6-meter logs. Second, I bought a blade sharpener. And 5 extra blades, because waiting for replacements from China every time didn't sound like fun. And honestly, I had no idea where to buy them here in Estonia, since I'd never had a sawmill before. In total, the whole package cost me $4,500, plus shipping. Shipping from China to Estonia by sea was hilariously cheap, about €200. That's because it was an LCL shipment, basically, you share container space with others. The package was delivered to a local warehouse. I used DB Schenker, well, now they merged with DSV, but nothing really changed. Big company, trustworthy, that's what I needed. They built the sawmill in about 60 days. Then they sent me photos and packaging confirmation, and I paid the remaining 70%. After that, shipping took another 70 days by sea from China to Tallinn through Hamburg. So overall, I actually received the sawmill only around mid-July. Alright, let's jump to the interesting part. I have to say, the packaging was solid, really solid. A sturdy metal frame, everything wrapped in layers of film, and the blade sharpener sitting neatly on top. It didn't look like anything could happen to it, even if someone decided to use the box as a dance floor. So, after I finally got the package, I tried to bring it into what will eventually be my workshop. Attempt number 1 did not go according to plan. The planks I intended to drive over, well, they snapped. Very dramatically. Lesson learned. Hope is not a construction material. No time to be upset. The day is long and full of engineering challenges. We shoved some bricks under the remaining pieces of timber and went for attempt number 2. And this time, success. Makes you wonder why I didn't build something reliable from the start, but hey, sometimes you just trust the universe a bit too much. Anyway, reversing a trailer into a workshop is a special kind of fun, especially with almost no space and heavy cargo. But we did it. The trailer made it to its destination. Alright, time for the unboxing. Not the glossy, slow-motion kind you see a million times on YouTube, but an unboxing all the same. When we opened the crate, I was honestly surprised at how tightly everything was packed. It's wild, a whole sawmill folded up into what looks like a tiny box. I kept thinking, no way that actually fits in there, but somehow it did. Everything was laid out incredibly compactly. We decided to take everything out, spread it across the floor, and, ideally, find something resembling an instruction manual before we started assembly. I was really hoping for clear instructions. Spoiler alert. Those hopes were overly optimistic. The saw itself was made up of dozens of small parts, but the cutting head, the business end, was already assembled and adjusted. That was a relief. At the same time, it created a big problem. It's heavy. We had zero idea how we'd lift that off the trailer without a crane or some kind of hoist. Future us was going to have to get creative. And then there was the box of a million screws. Standing there with all those parts spread out, you can't help but wonder, can this possibly turn into something that actually cuts wood?
Oh, look, a manual. Jackpot.
We tore it open, ready to follow step 1, and noticed something off. The manual was written in 2019, and time, for the record, is currently 2025. Which, yes, is a tiny detail when you're trying to reverse engineer someone else's idea of easy assembly. To be fair, the instructions for assembling the rails were actually quite detailed. No complaints there, that part turned out to be straightforward. You bolt the rail sections together, attach the legs, level everything out. Pretty logical, even without an engineering degree. The crossbeams were included in the kit. We counted how many we had, divided them across the total length, and spaced them evenly. We distributed the remaining crossbeams evenly along the rails and tightened everything up. Nothing overly complicated, just time-consuming. One thing bothered me, though. The manual said the distance between the tall inner ridges of the rails should be exactly 900 mm. In our case, it was 930. Those extra 3 centimeters kept haunting me. Will the saw head even fit? Will it roll smoothly? Spoiler. Yes, it did. But those 30 mm gave me a few extra gray hairs before we tested it. At some point we decided to check whether the rails were at least parallel. So we stretched a string along them, and of course, right in the middle, there was a dip deep enough to fit a fingertip. No saw in the world will run straight on rails shaped like a hammock. Another lesson learned: before tightening everything down, stretch a line and level it properly. Do not rely on your tired eyes and wishful thinking, they lie. The rails were finally assembled, and it was time for the next challenge: unloading the cutting head from the trailer. This thing was heavy, and the electric motor attached to it was no joke either. Probably around 50 kilos on its own. I disconnected the motor and we carefully removed it to at least make the head slightly lighter. Still, wow, it was a beast. Now we had to turn it around somehow and position it for unloading. And at that moment, I wished more than anything that I had a crane. Or a winch. Or a hoist. Or, ideally, 4 extra people who are stronger than me and less emotionally attached to their spines. Once we finally got the cutting head out of the crate, we decided to assemble the supporting frame first. The idea was simple: if the frame is ready and waiting, we could lower the cutting head straight from the trailer onto it. Of course, the manual was no help at this point. The instructions were clearly written for the gasoline model, and this electric version must be a rare species, because nothing matched anymore. Everything from this moment on was pure intuition and guesswork. Then came the attempts, plural, to actually get the head off the trailer. The height was significant, and simply tipping it over wasn't an option unless we wanted a very expensive metal pancake. What you're seeing on screen right now is us struggling. The footage is sped up by 20 times, and trust me, even that barely captures the amount of effort, improvisation, and borderline circus acrobatics involved. In the end, we threw some ropes over a load-bearing roof beam, and with a bit of friction, a bit of luck, and a lot of hope, we slowly lowered it down. Those ropes saved the day. Suddenly the head didn't feel impossibly heavy anymore, and inch by inch, we guided it to the floor. That moment, when it finally touched down, was pure joy. And of course, right when you've been filming the entire day, that's exactly when your phone storage fills up or the battery dies. So yes, the last heroic moments didn't make it onto video. Classic. The next day, we picked up where we left off. As I mentioned earlier, the manual had absolutely nothing to say about where anything should go, so we unpacked one part after another and tried to guess where each piece might belong. Thankfully, the mounting points were designed in such a way that the wrong parts didn't really fit in the wrong places, at least, not without forcing them. Of course, we still managed to make a couple of mistakes. left parts on the right side, right parts on the left, but only a few times. After that, we mounted the motors and bolted the entire frame together nice and solid. Next came the fun challenge, getting the whole thing to actually move and connecting the motors to the saw head and to the drive wheels. The kit included several long chains. The chain for the saw head was fairly straightforward. It attaches to the top of the head, runs through a sprocket on the motor, another sprocket on the frame, and then reconnects at the bottom. Pretty hard to mess that up. But the chain responsible for moving the whole machine forward and backward, that one took some work. It was long, continuous, and had to pass through what felt like a dozen sprockets, tension wheels, guide wheels, mystery wheels whose purpose only became clear much later. One of them was clearly the tensioner. At least, now it's clearly a tensioner. Back then, it took me 3 or 4 attempts to understand what it was doing there. But hey, success. It finally worked. Though honestly, it would have been amazing if the manual had shown even a single picture of how to route that chain. It would have saved us a huge amount of time, and probably a few gray hairs. I think I already mentioned this, but it's worth repeating. There was no real instruction manual for assembling this entire construction. So we kept going purely on intuition, slowly, piece by piece, trying to figure out where every part was supposed to live. Honestly, it still amazes me. They sell a fairly expensive kit, about $4,000, and yet somehow creating a proper assembly guide was apparently too much to ask. I mean, how hard would it be to include a few diagrams so customers don't feel like they're solving a mechanical jigsaw puzzle from another dimension? But here we were, following the ancient engineering principle known as, let's try attaching it here and see if it fits. And surprisingly, it worked out. More or less. Luckily, the electrical connections were mostly ready, so all we had to do was plug in the connectors. Sounds simple, right? Of course, it wasn't entirely problem-free. Some wires were clearly labeled in a sort of international language. Wire A goes to connector A. Wire B goes to connector B, easy peasy. But then came the limit switches, the sensors that stop the saw from sliding off the rails, forwards, backwards, up, or down. One of them was short, so it was obvious where it went. The other 3, on identical wires, could have gone anywhere. The labeling? Not helpful, just a Chinese character on each. And no, I don't speak Chinese. Fortunately, it's 2025, and with the help of GPT, I managed to figure out which sensor went where. I just snapped a picture of the characters, fed them into the chat, and voila, approximate instructions appeared. Big thanks to technology for saving my sanity here. Our first test was a success. We powered up the saw, started moving it, and voila, it stopped perfectly when it reached the sensor. You can see the yellow light on the sensor glowing. It's an inductive sensor that reacts to proximity. Phew, everything worked. Next, we tried testing the limit of movement sensor, and oops. Something went wrong. What exactly? Well, surprise, surprise, no instructions. We had no idea how to properly mount the lower plate. Turns out we installed it upside down. No problem. Grab the wrenches, unscrew it, flip it over. Swap the front and back plates. The distance between the sensors and the metal plates needs to be just a few millimeters. And now, the moment we've all been waiting for, testing how this saw actually cuts. But first, we need a log. It's great when there are logs just lying around, waiting for their destiny. It's less great when you have no lifting equipment, no trailers, no cranes, nothing to bring the log to the saw. So, it was down to 2 humans, 4 legs, and a lot of back pain. Trust me, our backs are not sending us thank you notes. Honestly, without fully understanding how to operate the saw, we somehow managed to start it. Hit the start buttons, and the saw came to life, humming, roaring, and slowly moving forward, its teeth sinking into the pine log. We froze for a moment, watching in awe. Of course, we were filming it on our phone, grinning like little kids. And there it was, a true miracle of engineering. It moved, it cut, hooray, it works, absolutely amazing. From the very first tests, the advantages of the electric saw over a gasoline one became clear. It starts with just the push of a button. It's quiet, no roaring engine, no exhaust fumes. A huge plus, especially if you plan to use it indoors. Of course, you still need some kind of roof or shelter to protect the saw if you want it to last a long time. Safety first, right? On the downside, you do need a serious electrical setup. This saw requires a 3-phase connection with a 20-amp circuit breaker. So, make sure your power supply is ready for it. The full automation feature is a real game changer. You can simply set the speed at which the saw moves forward, and it does the rest on its own. Super convenient. First, it frees you up to do other things. Second, you can walk around and check from all sides to make sure it's cutting perfectly. Third, it ensures a consistent cut, really important if you want a smooth, even surface. The electric up and down adjustment is also a lifesaver, saving you from tiny millimeter mistakes. The control panel is handy too, it shows all the essential information. Sure, it could display more, but it's enough to get the job done. Honestly, it feels like the manufacturer has only tapped about 10 to 15% of the saw's automation potential. Alright, let's start wrapping things up. The saw has been delivered and fully assembled. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. By the time I made this video, I'd already cut about 3 cubic meters of wood. The first log was pine, and after that, 3 cubic meters of ash. It's been an incredible experience, and I definitely want to share more about it in future videos. Check out my shorts, I post there more often, and they're shorter, so easier to catch up on. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.